without further ado, I want to introduce our Director of Music and Organist, Kent Tritle, and our Associate Director of Music and Organist, who will be with us to answer any additional questions, Daniel Fakari. What we're going to do today is just think about how Bach St. Matthews came to be and just sort of the background information and how that all works. And I'm just really interested, and as I'm sure you all are, of how so much work that goes into creating a concert this large and with so many groups. And I just want to hear about the nitty gritty. So Ken, first of all, thanks for being here with us today, and Dan. And so how did this come about? Like I know there's a Bach St. Matthew's Passion and a Bach St. John's Passion. And I just want to hear like why did you choose St. Bach's or Saint, not Saint Bach,
Hey,
maybe
Matthew.
Saint Matthew's Passion versus Saint John's, and give us some background.
Well, to begin with, this is kind of a year of big ideas at Big John. So we had Beethoven 9 for New Year's Eve, and that was a real smash. And we find that, or I'm finding that these big ideas do really grab the imagination of people. And our attendance has been terrific as a result. Oh, by the way, the organ recitals that are going on right now are phenomenally attended. We've had, upwards of 1,000 people at each of the past two recitals, Dan's last Tuesday and David Briggs tonight will have a similar number. So we've been working with how to, get out to people. Let me start by saying we've done the St. John several times. And doing St. John at St. John, Bach's St. John Passion, is kind of a really cool and wonderful thing to do. I'd like to actually just show a tiny clip. And if we could show that actually at this moment, this is a St. John Passion made possible by Friends of Music. And this is something that we did in defiance of the pandemic. We'll just listen to the very opening of the St. John Passion at St. John. You'll notice the orchestra is tiny, one on a part. And the choir is masked and spaced. Okay, thank you, Emma. And then we could come on to this. This is on our YouTube channel here at the Cathedral, and you can actually hear that. And when you're not on Zoom, the audio is actually so much better, as is the video. So I encourage you to do that. So we've done the St. John Passion a couple of times, but we have not done the St. Matthew while I've been here. And the Matthew um, is an epic. work. I know that many of you are aware of that, but it is the largest work of J.S. Bach, and the largest work which does not, by the way, contain reworkings of earlier material, all specially composed. It premiered in 1727 with another performance in 1729. And really meditated upon by the composer for then a performance in 1736, for which he meticulously wrote a manuscript that is what we base today's performances on. Personally, the Matthews had a major impact in my life from the time I was a graduate student at the Juilliard School in the music of Bach class. And my job was to organize performances of Bach works by the Juilliard students. So when I was able to dive into the Matthew Passion and start to begin to do portions and segments of it, it was just the thrill of a lifetime. And it's been an ongoing love affair. So the idea, to answer your question, Dana, the idea of doing the St. Matthew here at St. John the Divine really feels like the ultimate wedding of peace, grand architecture of Bach's work, and the grand architecture of our cathedral, and even if you think of how there's the crossing in the nave, and then there's the great choir and the chapels and the ambulatory, however you want to perceive how this large structure breaks down, the Matthew is similar. Let me say that the Matthew is about a third longer than the St. John, if not more than that. The St. John is all of about 120 minutes, and the Matthew is much closer to 150 minutes of music. The Matthew and the John both reflect their scriptural origins. The Gospel of John, as we just heard in this, and Bach, by the way, takes off on this. The John, which we just heard, has these incredible kind of painful suspensions and releases in that very turbulent but very veiled opening that we heard. And then we see the chorus exclaim, "Lord, you are glorious." And of course, the Gospel of John is about the glorification of the cross. The Gospel of John is shorter. The Gospel of John is intense and dramatic and just like burns like a hot coal all the way through. So we've done that. The Matthew then is an extended in time, but extended by way of, yes, it has bookend choruses that frame the masterwork, both in part one and in part two. So there are two parts, as there is with the John. And the second part, yes, like the St. John Passion, is longer in the Matthew than the first part. The essence of this, though, between those bookend choruses is made of 9 shenas, and we'll look a little more deeply at that in a little bit. But each shena involves the evangelist or the narrator who's narrating the text of the Gospel of John. It includes this narration includes the character of Christ, who then speaks the narrative and portrays that role. It includes minor roles, whether it's Pilate or whether it's the women who asked Peter if he knew Jesus, or these other kind of step out characters. There are that in also the crowd choruses. So we have all of this like a narrative that's going on that involves the scope of this text. And then we have in a shena, that's the shena, and then we have, that's gospel. We have text by Henrici, or Pickender as he was known, that is set for additional then rumination and meditation. So we will typically then have an aria, for example, Erbarmen dich, which we will possibly listen to today if we have time. And then we have ultimately a chorale, which represents the congregation knew these. They didn't necessarily sing them in the performance, but this is something that really reflects the community. Okay, so with this large structure of the work, we then have something that is large and I feel belongs at St. John. It's also really an amazing piece in the regard to how this structure plays out in the performing forces. And so with Pickender's text, we have these are the ruminating texts now, not the gospel texts. We have the two representational characters, allegorical characters. We have the daughters of Zion and we have the faithful. So we've got two things going on. Well, no wonder then that J.S. Bach said, therefore, we must have two choruses. We must have two orchestras, not one, but two. And so what we begin to see is this, and we'll look at a diagram shortly that shows how this lays out. We have this cast of characters that portray the actors in the gospel, and a further cast of soloists that give us this ruminative or meditative content and texture. We have the actors who are part of the turba or the crowd, but then also can participate in the ruminative textures. And then we have these chorales. We have that essentially 9 times through the course of this work. So what we have here is an amazing structure. I'm going to show, I guess I need to screen share first, and talk about, this is getting into the nitty gritty here. I admire deeply Helmut Rühling. So wonderful, wonderful conductor. Are you able to see? I think we can do this. Here's Helmut Rühling's diagram of how he would do this with essentially a smaller group, showing here he is. If you can see the cursor, here's the conductor. B1 is the Christus, the Christ character. T1 is the evangelist, the narrator. And then these are the 4 soloists, soprano, alto. He puts his tenor here and his bass here. We have 2 orchestras. Orchestra 1 in this case is with harpsichord for accompaniment and has then 3 violins, ones, violin 2, cello, violas, contrabass or double bass, and the winds. Orchestra 2 is comprised of a positive organ and similar strings, mirror, you see the mirror images here, and similar woodwinds. And by extension, in the complexity factor, these woodwinds over here don't just play the oboe, they play a second instrument, oboe d'amore, and they play a third instrument, oboe da caccia. And on it goes. And we finally also have, almost as one of the soloists, we have the viola da gamba. And the viola da gamba, which precedes the cello in history and chronology, plays both with Orchestra 1 and Orchestra 2. So as we go through these scenas, we make great use of how at the beginning in the bookend choruses, for example, we have antiphonal writing. Here's choir 1, here's choirs 2 in Helmut Rühling's diagram, and then there is a third choir, in this case labeled boys choir. So we have the sides that sing, play, and speak one to the other for dramatic effect. And that happens from the very opening chorus. As we get into the narration, then we have the business of every time Christ speaks, except when he's saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, instead of just being accompanied by, let's say, in this case, the harpsichord, and by the way, the cello, the principal cello, Christ is always accompanied by a halo of strings. This is unique to the St. Matthew Passion. It does not happen in the St. John Passion. So the complexity of how this lays out is one of the jobs of the music director to sort out. The complexity of how this rehearses. And by the way, if there are roughly 40 movements in the St. John Passion, there are 68 in the St. Matthew. And those movements are sometimes narrative, recitative, and other times a single aria, and so on. Here, I'm going to minimize this. Here is what we are doing. This is my rough sketch, which is now in being worked on by our productions department. And our sketch is a little bit more complicated. Is that large enough to see? You can
Can
see
you
okay?
focus in a little bit more?
Let me do this. Yeah, I can
And while you're
scroll
doing
it.
that, I forgot to say at the top that if you have any questions, just hold them to the end. You can raise your Zoom hand, or you can type them into the chat on the side of the screen. We'd love to hear it. But Kent, tell us more about how this will fit into the cathedral. It's amazing.
Well, here you go. Doesn't this look like the crossing itself? this
Yeah.
diagram. And so what we're wanting to do, and this is actually in the east end of the crossing with audience coming in down here. But here's what's happening at the cathedral. We have a similar platforming for the divided chorus, which is the cathedral choir. We're going to make use of space between that. That is not where our choristers, who will fulfill the third chorus function, will be. I'll show that in a minute. This is similar but enhanced. We have actually, because of the scale of our space, we actually have more instruments. We have four violin one, four violin two in each orchestra. We actually have two, not one organ, but two organs. And that harpsichord that you saw is moved to me. So I've got the harpsichord from which I can be doing some of the accompaniment of recitative and some narration for dramatic effect in terms of the sonority. And similarly, then we have these two organs which can be used. These are each little boxes of about 450 pipes that are tuned up and played. What we have here then, by extension at the cathedral, is our volunteer choir. Our volunteer choir has been rehearsing the 12 chorales that are the congregational hymn tunes, but the reason the congregation wasn't expected to sing them is that those chorales are very harmonically developed and there's quite a bit of word painting and so on like that. So they're really done as art. But when we come here, we have 16 singers here on this side that are the chorale, and we have another side of the chorale here. So we have 16 and 16. We have 16 singers here, 16 singers here. That's 32. We have another 32 that are going to flank the crossing sides at the initial part. And then we will have seated here our choristers in two sections. The choristers will come and enter into this area where they will be standing facing our audience and directed by Brian Zaros, who will be mirroring my direction as I conduct all of these people. This is how we are fitting the St. Matthew into our space in a way that mirrors the architecture. Um, they're going to make a much more beautiful diagram than this. Finally, what we're working on is also, because we are not in the great choir, these are the great choir steps. Behind that, we are attempting to set up our very large screen, which we use for our organ recitals, perhaps raise the screen higher than the great choir floor, and with video have camera able to get closer in on our soloists and our narration. So as the audience is watching, they will see this configuration, but also see, and especially for those further back in the nave, see a little bit more of the action as it happens here on the large screen. So this is how we set these forces and this element into the cathedral space. Just to drill down a little bit more into what this looks like. Let me just see. Is this what I want? No, that's not what I want. Here we go. This is very much the fun part. And you can imagine this has been a long time in the making when you think about budgeting and getting things together. But here's what our friend Arthur does. He gets this sheet from Kent. And so we show each orchestra here's orchestra one. It has two flutes. It has two oboes who double both amore and a caccia. Each doubling is another 20%. It has orchestra one has bassoon. Our strings are four violin, one, four, two, three violas, one cello, one bass, and the gamba, which plays in both orchestras, and Dan is playing organ. That means Arthur doesn't have to call Dan to hire him. And then orchestra two, we have our flutes and our oboes again. This time they just double once on the d'amore, which is a gorgeous dark colored instrument. Same string section. There's no bassoon in orchestra two. Whoops. Then here comes the rehearsal schedule. And by the way, is this too much information? Are we doing okay? All right. Thank you,
Yes.
Julie.
If you could zoom in a little bit, that
Oh,
would
thank
be
you.
really helpful.
I will do that
Your
again. I just have to figure
bottom,
out.
yeah,
Yep, here
there
we
you
are.
go.
Oops. Stop
No,
that.
I think this is interesting because it's just Something I was thinking about is that when I was looking at that image is that there's so many logistical things happening. Like, how do you get that all fit that all in and make sure everyone's on the same page? Like, it's fascinating.
It's really something. So let's talk about the chorale. The chorale received our volunteer choir, they received their packets, which have the harmonizations and specific editorial, soft, loud, crescendo, decrescendo. They've been working on that since January 1st. The choristers who will come in part one, they are an important part of the opening bookend chorus and of the closing chorus of part one. They will be stepping in. They've been working on this material now for several weeks. Their role is more of a cameo role, but a very important one. It would have been the boys of the St. Thomas Choir, probably combined with the boys from the Nicolai Church Choir. Okay, so we then have our orchestras that are hired. Talking about the rehearsal schedule, then for our professionals, here we have musicians. The gamba, because he plays with both orchestras, has to have specific time elements when the gambist is called. And these times listed, we have a Wednesday, March 5th rehearsal with the orchestra and soloists. And what that will mean is Orchestra 1 is coming in the morning from 9 a.m. until 2 p.m. And then Orchestra 2 comes from 3 to 5:30. Orchestra 2 has a little less material. Then we have on Thursday, this is not on Thursday. We have on Thursday, by the way, before you look at this, let me just say that there's a Wednesday rehearsal I described, a Thursday rehearsal, which is Orchestra 1 and Orchestra 2 with Choir 1 and Choir 2 and the choristers and the chorale. An hour 15 minutes of Orchestra 1, Choir 1 alone, an hour 15 of everyone combined together, and an hour 15 of just Orchestra 2, so that everything gets rehearsed, putting the narration and putting the character elements together. Whereas Wednesday's soloists, Thursdays then much more about the choirs and the orchestras. And then Friday, we have a 4-hour dress rehearsal where everything flows in order and is lived. And then on Saturday, we have our concert. So what you see here then is the breakdown of who comes in when. Here we go. The orchestra 1 breaks down and the flutes have a specific call. In case you're wondering, yes, money is an issue. And so if we have a 2.5-hour minimum rehearsal for these players, but we have a 5-hour rehearsal for some, we're going to hire those for 2.5 that can be just done for 2.5. And so we get involved in this incredible checkerboard grid making of deciding who's coming in when. And what you'll see is that Orchestra 1 is actually completely in from the violins and violas are starting. Well, here we go. The cello and bass are from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. They're there the whole time, along with Dan. The violins and violas are going to come in and start at 9:15, and then that string business is done at 11:45. The oboes, we can start them at 9:55. They have to space themselves out, but we get them out at 1:50. And this all works so that it corresponds to this. Again, it might be a little TMI, but it's just so much fun to do this. This is all what happens. Whoops, this is what happens before we get to the music. And so if I wonder where here it is. Ah, there we are. Oh, there we go. This now is just a further breakdown just to show you, and then I won't bore you. This is like doing a lot of math. Let me see. How can I do this? Here is the schedule for that Wednesday. 68 movements. Well, the choruses and the chorales are not done, but this is really mind-bending. So you see, we have a breakdown for every one of these. I list the time it starts, the movement and who is doing it, the title of the work, which soloist it is, and how many minutes I'm allotting for that rehearsal. And here you go from 9 a.m. all the way through to 1:50. But wait, there's more. Here comes Orchestra 2. And so here's our 3 to 5:30. It's a 2.5 hour minimum, so I didn't have to, there's no money to be saved by having the flutes first. So we go in a different ordering here. And again, what's happening is the same idea with, finally we finish with a little bit of continuo and some things that happen for those actors that step out of the chorus that will get rehearsed on Thursday. That's the bit of the drill down on the logistical side of this. Before the choir shows up, the cathedral choirs show up on Thursday. They will have had two piano rehearsals where we go through the entire work. And so they are coached and set up. Every soloist will have had an hour and a half to 2.5 hour solo coaching. I start those at 4 o'clock today with Paul Appleby, who is singing his first evangelist. This is a big deal. The evangelist is a huge role. And so that's a bit of a drill down, Dana, into what kind of goes on with this. Shall we move on to your next question? And let me
Yeah.
unmute here.
Um, Dan, do you want to say something? It seems like you were ready.
Please
Yeah, I
do.
was just going to add in Wednesday, the first rehearsal day, March 5th. What's not mentioned on the sheet is that's actually Ash Wednesday. So the cool thing is that we're presenting this incredible piece the first weekend of Lent. So
Yes.
the very time in the church that the readings are all about the events leading up to and including the Passion, crucifixion, resurrection of Christ. So it's a really amazing time in the liturgical year to get to experience a piece like this. But obviously, with that being Ash Wednesday, a very busy time, but incredibly rewarding.
Well, and what you see is that Dan is playing in Orchestra One, and Orchestra One rehearses before the evening service is the one with the choir. So Dan will be free from Orchestra Two's rehearsal time, which Jacob will play, Jacob, our organ scholar, so that Dan and Brian can actually gather the choir and do the evening service and prepare that while we're rehearsing, finishing up with Orchestra Two and Choir Two and Jacob. Absolutely.
You're everywhere, Dan.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And then it should say sleep starting at 10 p.m. Exactly.
Exactly. Because the next days are very full and rich.
Yeah. So I have one more question, and then I want to turn it over to our friends here in the audience. When you place the orchestra and choir, do you think about how the sound is goes with the architecture, like how the sound reverberates? Like, do you think about that at all?
Oh yeah, we think about that, all the time. In this case, a year ago, we actually placed our performers up into the great choir, and then on risers, the great choir we love, the great choir. The great choir has that terrazzo or marble floor. That floor is slightly raked. It has the sides of the choir stalls themselves, which are slightly curved out this way. So what you have essentially is an architectural megaphone. We love being in the great choir. That's great because it does focus that sound. The next place to try to be is as close to the proscenium, as it were, the arch at the west end of the great choir as we can be. And that's what we've done with this performance, where we're in the crossing. In the crossing, the sound tends to not have the elements to frame it quite as well, but the crossing is remarkable because it can accommodate this double choir, double orchestra formation. So we find the way that we can do this. The choirs, for example, will be on risers so that their sound does go out over. So there will be risers flanking, and the woodwinds will be on risers as well behind the orchestra on the floor. And so this is always a consideration, and this is also why we wanted to have a more sense of surround by having our chorale frame onto the side, um, and so on.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, and the audience will be sitting in the nave, right?
There'll be, yep, the audience will meet us in the crossing
Okay.
and then extend back into the nave.
Okay. That sounds really
So yeah,
interesting.
it's exciting.
So we talked a little bit about how we organize and all of the the algebra issue, the algebra like equation you have to do. So it's
Right.
interesting. So yeah, that gives us a little bit of background into St. Matthew's Passion. So I wonder, does anybody else have questions or comments or
I
Um,
could talk forever, so
I
please
I
bring them
mean,
on. You guys are the
um,
ones who will be here to see this.
yeah, I don't know if Emma, our tech maven, can you make it so that we can see everyone? So maybe if somebody has raised their hand, I don't.
Yes, I can. One moment.
I have a question.
Thank you.
Oops.
And I see that Patricia has a question.
Yes, I do. Hello.
Pat. Hi, Pat.
There.
So exciting. Now, Kent, which part is your most treasured part?
Oh, of the Matthew.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Immediately I go to the final chorus. The final goodbye is just astounding. The moment that the centurion says, "Surely this was the Son of God," is just hair-raisingly beautiful. And how that then comes to this amazing chorus of us. There's at St. Once, here we sit, in our tears. It's so profoundly moving. But there's so many other parts that are incredible too, whether it's the earthquake scene with the continuo scruffling around and the evangelist, proclaiming that, or Barmadi, have mercy on me, Lord, bum dee da dum, be dum da dee da dum, or out of love, my Savior will die for me, Aus Liebe, which is just a stunning movement. Um, that's my answer to your question. Of course, the whole thing, but I think that the culmination is just extraordinary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moves me. Marcia,
I have a question. You kept referring to something called a Shana at the beginning.
the
Could you
scene.
spell? It's a scene.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm sorry. So we have these little scenes, and
Okay, I thought it meant beautiful in Yiddish, but I guess
oh,
that's not what
why not?
why
Yeah.
that's a scene. Okay, thank you.
So there's these 9 scenes that happen, and then they're each composed of these elements: the narration, and then the reflection, and yeah, and then
Okay,
the
thank
crowd.
you.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, sure.
Yeah.
I
We
thought the same thing, Marcia. I was like, oh, he's gonna say Shayla next, you know.
Uh-oh,
Yeah,
too much inside baseball.
yeah.
That's it.
Also, when I was at one of the performances many years ago that Bruce, forget his last name, he was a
Neswick.
yeah, Nesbitt, and they did it in the crossing exactly as you, maybe not exactly because nobody showed us a layout, but it was right in the crossing, and it was quite wonderful. It was wonderful.
That was in about 2010, maybe 2009, 10, right in there. It's just before I came.
Right, right.
And then that was epic. And yes.
Mr. Purdy?
Ah,
Unmute,
they're
unmute.
muted. We'll have to unmute. Oh, somehow we all became muted, I think, Emma.
Am I hearable now?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Ken.
Hi there.
Will there be a program of any sort with the text of what will be sung, or
Most definitely. If I might, let me just see if I have it right here. Program, copy, diagram. Oh, yes. Here we go. Let me just do a quick share and I'll show you. I am delighted to say that we have permission from Emmanuel Church, Boston, to use Pamela Delal's translation. Um, Up, maybe this won't do it for me. Okay. If not, the answer is yes. There's a major program. We have the text and translation by Pamela Delal, and we have also other details, and of course our wonderful friends of Music List. So yes, we'll have that on hand.
good? Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, Joseph.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. That was wonderful. And Patricia, I loved your question. Thank you. What are the acoustics unique to singing underneath a dome? And for choirs, particularly antiphonal, that have to be able to hear each other, and the large space that separate musicians from choirs what are the what can go right? What can go wrong?
Mhm.
What are the steps you take to mitigate the kind of problems that might arise in that situation?
Fantastic. I'll start by saying something that is really, I'll start by sharing that the dome acoustics are different than they used to be. One of the first things that I noticed when we finally got back into the Great Choir after the cleaning of the dome was that the sound was more immediate and bright. And that is from my position standing in the Great Choir. It's on the one hand, it could almost be conceived of as an additional echo factor to have something coming back instead of just hearing the far end of the cathedral. But on the other hand, that surface is more reflective than it was. But that said, I'll go back. Let's go back and think for a minute on that St. John video that we saw, because I think was extraordinary in that our singers were 12 feet apart, spaced out in a grid. And to answer your question, we spend a lot of time saying, here's the beat. The consonants need to be just before the beat, and you need to go with the beat and not the sound that's around you. So those singers afterwards, I was all emotional. I said, that was so extraordinarily beautiful. And they said, really? We couldn't hear it. We didn't know. I said, well, you did exactly what we talked about, and it came together so gorgeously and beautifully. And not only that, because it was the Cathedral Choir, know what it is like to sing in closer ensemble where we can hear each other. And so they know the box within which they should shape their dynamics and their tone production so that the sound does all blend and come together. This will be much easier than that. But it is absolutely that people need to listen to, and they need to have a clear direction from the conductor. So this kind of thing doesn't work very well, but this kind of thing does. The timing of that and how they do that is really critically important. It's a short answer. And Dan, do you have anything to throw in about the acoustics of the dome?
Yeah, definitely. I think I experience a lot more resonance with the dome having been cleaned, and I think you're right on, Kent, with the brightness of the sound too.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that ought to enhance what we're doing very much.
It's really amazing. You all may recall or not, but if that dome was really a black hole into space. You couldn't see the top of that dome, and it had not been cleaned since 1911, as far as we understand. So to take all those years of all kinds of detritus and incense off of that dome, not only has made that incredible Guastavino tile visible, but has really helped us acoustically. But back on your question, Joseph, the wonderful thing about live performance is that anything can happen, and usually something does. So and of course, the other thing is that we don't have, we are never in a situation where we have too much rehearsal. So, so everyone is on their game as we do this.
I would say too, just back on the dome for one moment, I think it acts as a sort of mixing bowl that, things that are moving very quickly can be maybe a little on the mushy side, but what you get from that is, when you hear a chorale being sung, that four-part harmony, really gels in a way that each chord projects into the room as a single unit. The effect of harmonies, thanks to that dome, is pretty phenomenal.
And I can't wait to hear the sounds of the choirs as they fan out. Yeah, Bill.
Kent, you mentioned twice the translator of the text when you were describing the program that we could not see.
Yes.
But you didn't identify why that translation could be important. And so I thought I would ask you to give us a bit more information.
Well, so with a translation, once we have a translation, let us say that, from the 19th century on, there were all kinds of really flowery prose translations, which didn't actually reflect really the content of the actual German. So coming up with a readily perceptible and readable translation that is also as close to a word by word translation as you can get is of great importance. And the reason I mentioned Emmanuel in Boston, their incredible cantata series, their incredible Bach series now for these many, many, many decades has really led the way in terms of setting standards. And one of the things that is so remarkable is their consistency and quality of the texts and translations that they have done of these programs. Many may remember Lorraine Hunt Lieberson's Cantata 82, Ich habe genug. If not, look it up. It's on YouTube. It was Peter Sellers staged it. And anyway, the quality is tremendous. And Pamela Dalal, actually, I know Pamela. She was active as one of the teachers at the Berkshire Choral Festival, where I conducted a number of times, and is very active in the Boston area as a singer, performer, and a musicologist. And so she had done this translation, and we reached out to be able to have that. There is a whole other discussion in terms of how that can work. But in a nutshell, that's what's so special about this. It's coming from a living, breathing person who we're collaborating with, and it'll be of the high quality.
So Emma, did you have a question?
I do, yes. So Kent, I know we are bringing in a number of really fabulous soloists for this piece.
Yes.
So could you speak a little bit about who they are and some of the roles they're playing and just what to expect from that? Because I know we've got some really amazing folks coming in.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So, some who were at a Friends of Music event will remember Joseph Parrish, who's a wonderful young African-American bass baritone. And Joseph, excuse me, a little water. Joseph is singing Christus, the role of Christ. So he will be the one with that halo of strings, meaning the orchestra strings playing as he's singing throughout. This is his first Christus, and Paul Appleby, who is a wonderful tenor who sung at the Met and Glyndebourne and many places, I've worked with Paul since he graduated from Juilliard, and we've done many, many things together, but he's never sung the role of the evangelist, which is one of those, tenor take me now kinds of things to do. And so he's our storyteller, and I think he'll be just fantastic. Ava Martinez is one of the up and coming sopranos. She was actually a member of the Cathedral Choir, came out of Manhattan School of Music, and then is accepted into the Yale program. So she's now at Yale, and she made her Carnegie debut earlier this year, and she'll be singing the soprano arias. Mary Beth Nelson Zaros, if that name sounds familiar, Brian Zaros and Mary Beth Nelson were married in October, and Brian is our associate music director and choir master. Mary Beth is a marvelous mezzo. She's, let me just say, one of the great privileges in my life is to teach a graduate elective at Juilliard called Oratorio Practicum. I've been doing this now since the early 2000s, and I do it about every other year. Mary Beth was in my class, and on the last one before the one I'm teaching now, 2 years ago, and on the basis of that, I invited her to sing a role in Handel's Samson at Carnegie Hall, and she's an exquisite performer. So this will be her first St. Matthew. Joshua Blue is an amazing tenor who has sung with us many times, or sung with me many times, but again, had been in my class at Juilliard, and is now doing the opera scene all over, everywhere from the Met to where have you. But he's a wonderful concert singer, Joshua Blue. And then finally, Harrison Hincha is recently out of the Yale program and is our bass baritone, or our baritone soloist. So it's a wonderful cast. Many people doing their first Matthew, which is also thrilling to do. And just to say, gosh, it was through that class that I first met Susanna Phillips and Sasha Cook and Isabel Leonard and so many of these really amazing people. It's really fun to watch them become who they are eventually as full-fledged, career singers.
All right, thank you. So we have one more question from Elise, and I'll just read it out. I was at Beethoven's Ninth and was relieved when the microphones were put on. Will there be microphones during this performance?
This goes back to Joseph's question too. So let's talk about how the audience gets to hear this sound. I'm going to say it here. The Met Opera exists in a building that is larger than human scale. We all know that. We all know that there are challenges, and there are limitations in the voices that can or can't sing at the Met. St. John the Divine is a cathedral beyond human scale. We have the widest great choir in Western Europe or the United States. It's fantastic. It presents many opportunities. It also presents challenges, and of course, the challenge is intelligibility. So, in a room that's amazing, especially for Gregorian chant or Palestrina or the music of Arvo Pärt or John Tavener, when you get to the works of Bach, it's great to have a little bit of enhancement. And so the short answer to the question is yes. Our audio crew will be on, and what we work for is a very subtle presence of the performing forces to be available. We work so that to the extent possible, depending on where one is seated, you have the sense and the sonority of the sound coming from the performers in real time. The speakers themselves are on a delay function so as to echo so to speak, the time that it takes for sound to travel in the room. And so what we do is we bring up enough closeness that we can hear text and things like as you did with the Beethoven, and we'll be doing that with the St. Matthew too. And that is quite an art just to manage the audio for that.
I think next time we do these discussions, we should have production in here to talk about it because, I mean, Ken and Dan, thank you so much for talking us through all of this. It takes a village that we have all of these
Yes.
beautiful like musicians and all of this planning and then our production staff. So like I said, it takes a village and I'm so thankful that everyone that attended today is here because you are part of our village too. So we really appreciate all the support you give us and all of the support you have here with this wonderful discussion we just had. So if you haven't already, purchase your tickets to Bach St. Matthews, A Passion. I'm going to put the link in the chat here. And I hope that we will see you there and anytime around the cathedral. So once again, thank you, Ken and Dan. And we will see everyone at the cathedral soon.
Thank you all for
Thank
joining
you.
us. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Have a great day.
You
Thanks,
too.
Ken. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Ken.
Bye-bye.